My name is Art, and this took place at my home in Plattsmouth, Nebraska. Years ago, we had a week-long period where significant thunderstorms were rolling in late at night, and it was happening every night. Storms are common here in the summer, but having them at night and consecutively for that long is a little out of the ordinary. On one of the nights while this was going on, I had already gone to bed, and I think I was hearing the thunder before I actually woke up because I remembered dreaming about it. Then it eventually got me up, and since I didn't have to work in the morning, I found myself in the mood to watch the storm for a while since I've always loved a good light show at night. I got a bottle of iced tea out of the fridge and slid our glass door all the way open so I could hear through the screen. Then I sat in one of our dining room chairs so I could look into the backyard where we had the best view. Within 60 seconds of watching this storm, I was hearing the weirdest sound every time the thunder would crack. There was something mixed in with it, and I couldn't tell if it was happening beforehand and echoing or right afterward. To my ear, it sounded like a metal-on-metal scraping noise, but at a very low pitch and on a large scale, like it was part of the thunder. It reminded me of old machinery running, and it didn't sound natural. I listened as closely as I could, trying to figure out what I was hearing, but I couldn't tell. I ended up getting out of the chair and standing at the back door with the screen open because I wanted the best view of the sky. We have a small roof over the back door, but it only sticks out about a foot, so it doesn't block much. Then things happened very fast. I couldn't have been looking outside for more than a minute when there was a bolt of lightning almost directly above us. It wasn't one that hit the ground, it went from cloud to cloud vertically, and I happened to be looking right at it when it flashed. As soon as it lit up the clouds around it, I saw a huge black triangle shape tilted at an angle in front of the bolt of lightning. I'm going to say something too. This was not a separate, weirdly shaped cloud. It was a physical, solid object, and because the lightning was behind it, there was a perfect outline and silhouette of this thing. I could clearly see the edges, and it was completely black to me with the bright light behind it. It was so startling and caught me so off guard that I took this long step backward without even thinking and stepped on one of my own slippers. That made my right foot slide across the floor and the rest of my body followed. I went down hard and found myself lying on my side on our dining room floor. As I was putting my hands down to get back up, I leaned forward and could see past the edge of the roof again when there was another bright flash of lightning. This one came from the right side, so it didn't light the object as clearly as the first time, but it was enough to see it again, and it was in the exact same place. At that point, there was no question it was real. A lot of people talk about seeing black triangle-shaped things in the sky, and I don't want to sound like I'm repeating someone else's story here, but that's what I saw, and it was hovering between the clouds. The only thing that might be different is that what I saw looked tilted, like it was banking at an angle. After that second time, I ran back into our room and woke my wife up, telling her to come out immediately. I'm sure she thought the house was on fire since I didn't explain anything, but she jumped out of bed and followed me to the back door. As soon as we looked outside, there was plenty of lightning, but not a single damn thing in the clouds, and I could not believe it wasn't there anymore. I was so frustrated by this that it's still hard for me to talk about without getting upset. My wife watched the storm with me for a long time, and I told her every detail about what I'd seen. There were countless other bolts of lightning around us after that, but she never got to see it, and I really needed her to. Not just to validate what I saw, but also because it was so unbelievable. She went back to bed after a while because she was getting cold and it was late, but I stayed in the dining room with the door and screen wide open for at least another hour until the storm had gone past us. Every time lightning flashed, I would look around like a hawk trying to find it again, and I barely got any sleep that night, even after the storm was gone. I talked about this sighting constantly over the following days because I couldn't stop thinking about it, and honestly, who wouldn't do that? I told my two closest friends and even called my elderly father to get his opinion, and to my surprise, no one questioned me. Maybe it was how I acted, but every one of them believed I had seen something, and I think they all knew I wouldn't make it up. What happened to me only lasted a few seconds, but that's all it took. This was no cloud formation or hallucination or aircraft. I saw some kind of ship that could not have been from Earth because nothing looks like that, and nothing else could sit there perfectly still in a thunderstorm. That's actually one of my biggest questions. Why would it be doing that? I have really changed since that night, and I watch thunderstorms differently now. I've always loved to see them, but these days I will sit outside and stare into the clouds until it's completely over, and I do this religiously. People are free to believe whatever they want about UFOs and alien encounters, but nothing could ever change my mind. Since I saw it with my own eyes, I feel like I'm part of a special club now where I know these things exist. I am the oldest of 3 kids. I'm 2 years older than my sister and 11 years older than our little brother, Evan. We all grew up in West Plains, Missouri, and still live close to our parents except for my sister who lives in Virginia now. What happened to us included my whole family, and it was back when I was 15, my sister had just turned 13, and Evan was 4. He's 30 now and doesn't remember any of it, but the rest of us will never forget. About 6 months before my sister's birthday, Evan started talking about an imaginary friend, and it came out of nowhere. He would sit in his bedroom by himself and have these long conversations with someone who obviously wasn't there. Usually he would be laughing and playing with his toys, but sometimes you could hear him talking after he'd already been put to bed for the night, and I know there were a few times where I heard him up and walking around in his room. Because I was a teenager then, I really didn't pay much attention to it, but I do remember it being a little creepy when we'd hear him talking to someone when we all knew he was alone. My parents never seemed to worry about it though, so we didn't either. The day everything changed was on my sister's 13th birthday. This was in May, and my mom had gone all out for her party. She had oversized balloons tied to all the tables in the backyard, and there were games set up in the lawn. And she even got a tiered birthday cake that was on the main table where the gifts were. I think 10 or 12 girls were there for most of the afternoon and evening, but I was gone for a lot of it because I was at a friend's house. When I got home, it was starting to get dark and all of my sister's friends were getting picked up. My mom was cleaning out back while my sister was bringing things inside with our back doors wide open, and I was in the kitchen with my dad. I vaguely remember this, but Evan was sitting in the grass next to the table where the cake was and entertaining himself with one of those paper party horns that unroll when you blow into them. It was a normal evening where everyone was doing their own thing. Then, after the last of my sister's friends were gone, something unexplainable happened. While my mom and sister were carrying gifts back to her room, I was still talking to my dad, and the entire kitchen and living room lit up brighter than daylight. This was like a lightning strike, except it wasn't instant. It quickly faded up until everything around us was glowing bright white, then just as quickly faded back down again, and probably only lasted a second or two, but my dad and me were in complete shock. At the exact time, there were 10 or 15 loud pops all at once, and since they almost went off in a row, it sounded like a string of blackjack fireworks in our backyard. Then we heard Evan screaming. My mom dropped everything she was holding onto the floor and ran out the back doors, and the rest of us followed right behind her to see what was up. When I got onto the grass, my mom was already on her knees in the yard holding Evan into her chest. My dad was freaking out and asking what happened, and for a few seconds nobody knew what was going on. Then someone noticed the balloons. Every single one that had been tied to the main table where Evan was had popped, and the strings were hanging down on the ground. This was like a dozen large helium balloons altogether, maybe 6 on each side, and my mom had just bought them that morning before the party. They were well over Evan's head and they were tied to the table, so there's no way he could have done anything to them, and there was nothing left but shredded pieces of rubber on the ends of the strings. Those loud pops we had heard from inside were the balloons bursting all at the same time, and no one could explain it. What's especially weird about this is that there were still other balloons around the backyard and they were perfectly fine. It was only the ones next to Evan that popped, and it was really the craziest thing I think I've ever seen. After a few minutes, we all went back inside and my mom got Evan to stop crying enough to talk to him about what happened. I will never forget what he said. In his shaky little voice, he told my mom that his friend had popped the balloons, and he was referring to his imaginary friend. Then when my mom kept pushing him, he told her this friend was mad that Evan couldn't go with him, and that was the only answer my parents ever got out of him. The fun birthday mood that had been in the house all day completely changed after that. What had been a normal party turned into one of the strangest nights our family has ever had. I know my parents tried talking to Evan many more times, but he was 4 and he couldn't explain things like they wanted him to. He just kept saying the same thing. It was really a scary thing to hear coming out of a kid that age, even when I was a teenager. I didn't spend a lot of time with Evan back then, but according to my mom, he never mentioned his friend again, not even one time. For 6 months, he talked about him almost daily. Then after the incident in the backyard, it came to a dead stop and there were no more conversations with someone who wasn't there. It was like his friend had never existed afterward. Today, Evan is almost 31 and he says he kind of remembers all of this, but I don't think he does. I think the only reason he says that is because the rest of us have talked about it enough over the years that he knows the story. I can't imagine he has any actual memories of that night though. My sister and I have always been closer because of our age, and I've talked to her about this more than anyone else in the family. We've both come to the conclusion that Evan had some kind of close encounter when he was little. The way he would talk to his friend was so convincing, like he was actually communicating with something. Then I think of our house lighting up right before the balloons popped and he started crying, and it just seems so much like an abduction, or at least an attempted one anyway. None of us could ever forget this, even though we don't talk about it much anymore. And the only one who's never been bothered by it is Evan, because he was just too young to understand or remember it. In 1984, I was 33 years old and living in Irvine, California. Whenever possible, I would pack a bunch of camping gear onto my Yamaha 500 XT and ride out to the Mojave Desert. This particular trip was in March and I was going solo because my flaky friends were too busy sitting on their butts and drinking beer. I stopped in Lucerne Valley for gas and food before heading to my campsite near an abandoned rock quarry in the Johnson Valley off-road site. When I got there, it was late in the afternoon and the first thing I did was set up camp. After organizing my stuff, I spent the remaining daylight collecting firewood and exploring around the immediate area. Then after it got dark, I sat by the fire and started to watch all of the passenger planes flying from east to west as they approached the Los Angeles area. I did this for long enough to notice the pattern of how they would all line up as they were coming in and also their direction, which made me think they were probably going to the Ontario airport near San Bernardino. As they kept flying by, I could really see and hear when they would slow the engines down to lower their altitude preparing to land, and they would also have their landing lights on. These lights were fairly bright and there were 2 of them, one on each wing, along with their red and green port and starboard marking lights. Every plane I saw had the same configuration and they were flying in a single file line pretty evenly spaced apart. But then I saw one a few miles to the east that only had a single light on it and it was much brighter than all the other planes. It was still following along in the same pattern as the rest of them, but it really stood out to me from the ground. As I was watching this, I couldn't help but focus on the brighter single light and I was trying to figure out why it looked so much different. Then this aircraft, whatever it was, suddenly stopped in mid-air. I honestly thought it was having problems and expected to see it drop down or possibly even crash, but after it stopped, it slowly descended from the higher approach altitude to what looked like only 100 feet above the ground. This was a completely bizarre sight and unlike anything I've ever seen. The specific location where I was camping happened to be up on a slight rise above the desert floor, and that whole area is surrounded by large granite outcroppings that rise up hundreds of feet with the San Bernardino Mountains about 10 miles to the west. When this bright light stopped after its descent, it was roughly at my level. Then it continued moving from east to west, which was in my general direction, and at about the speed of a helicopter. I watched it get closer until it was passing me at around a quarter mile away, so extremely close. This was when I knew I was seeing something extraordinary. The light itself had the most unbelievable shape. It looked like a perfect ball in the air, but also had a spiky, glistening surface, and even though it was extremely bright, it wasn't blinding me and I could look directly at it. On top of that, it was silent, so there's no way it could have been a helicopter. All I could do was stand there with my mouth hanging open, and I was actually pinching myself to confirm it was really there and I wasn't dreaming. When it finally got past me, it continued moving in a westerly direction toward the mountains, and it seemed to be following the terrain and maintaining this perfect distance between itself and the ground below. It was surreal to see this, and nothing I know can move like that. Then it gained a little bit of altitude and came to another complete stop, hovering right next to one of the smaller peaks. The second it did this, an incredibly bright light came out of the object, lighting up the entire side of the hill just like daytime. I could see the individual trees and bushes and even make out their brown and green colors. This light had two very strange properties, and the first was that it could illuminate an incredibly precise area. The line between light and dark was razor sharp with no diffused light at all along the boundary. The second was that it wasn't casting any shadows that I could see. The rocks and vegetation were just lit perfectly with this flat, unnatural, and shadowless light. Keeping track of time was the last thing on my mind, but I would guess this lasted between 2 and 5 minutes, so I was definitely able to see it clearly. Then, when it was finished with whatever it was doing, it virtually exploded into motion again, but this time it went north, and at a speed that looked like a meteor cutting through the atmosphere. From my vantage point, it really resembled that, like it had literally shot up into space. I spent the rest of the night in total awe, wondering what I had just seen. This experience didn't scare me exactly, and I didn't pick up my camp and leave either. I think I was more in shock that things like that do actually happen. I never had the slightest interest in UFO sightings at that point in my life, but after this happened, I couldn't stop thinking about it. When I told my friends about my experience back in Irvine, all I got were jokes and ribbing, so I've only ever told a few other people over my lifetime. These days, I'm not as concerned though. If I tell someone and they believe me, that's great, and if they don't, I don't care. I think what I saw had a very specific purpose or mission because of the way it came and went with intelligent guidance. Maybe it was using the line of planes to kind of sneak into the area before dropping down to the ground to avoid detection. After that, it seemed to just do its business and take off like it was just passing through. Whatever it was, I can't believe I was there at that exact place and time to witness it.